Parker got a jump start on her summer.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Meltzer Hellrung's May webinar, International Travel Guidance and Corporate Travel Policies. We thank everybody for joining us today. We will get started at 3 after to allow folks to enter the room. Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. We want to thank everybody for joining us today. This is Meltzer Hellrung's May 2025 webinar, International Travel Guidance and Corporate Travel Policies. A lot of things changing very quickly here, including yesterday, which we'll cover today. The webinar is for informational purposes only, and we encourage you not to consider it legal advice. If you do have a specific issue about travel or corporate travel policy or something going on with your foreign national population, we encourage you to reach out to Matt or myself directly, and we'll be providing our contact information during the presentation. We've set aside 1 hour today till about 1 p.m. Central. We ask that if you have questions, we're happy to answer them for you. If they're not too case or fact specific, you can type those into the Q&A function, and we'll try to answer those in real time as we go through the various sections we prepared today. We'll also be recording the webinar, so feel free to relax, finish your lunch, listen to the discussion actively, ask any questions that you have. We will be providing a copy of this deck as well as the recording out to everybody that registered for the webinar today. And I think we'll go ahead and get started. So a little bit about us. At Meltzer Hellrung, we combine an innovative service model, proprietary technology, and a really creative immigration team to provide immigration solutions to corporate clients, investors, businesses, high net worth individuals. A cross section of our book, we have about 200 active corporate clients at any given time. Active to us means they've opened a case or processed a case with us within the last year. And the cross section of that book looks like Global 200 companies, Fortune 500 companies, and venture-backed unicorns in various spaces, including EdTech, AIs, and SaaS. And we're really proud to be recognized in 2023 by Crane Magazine as one of the best 100 places to work in Chicago. And more recently, we were ranked by Illinois Chamber Spotlight in 2025, recognized as a top law firm handling immigration in Illinois. A little bit about our SLAs and our service models to clients. I think there are a lot of good immigration attorneys in the country. We're all a little stressed right now, given all the changes under the Trump administration. We endeavor not only to provide great legal service and advice that's creative and value add, but also solve the business problem that is immigration, and that is responsiveness. We average about 4.5 hours in terms of response time during a business day. So if you email us in the morning, we'll typically get back to you by that afternoon. You can always put an alert in your title section to hopefully signify us that we can respond a little faster if there is an emergency. We are really efficient with our casework. We turn around transfer cases, which are adding new employees to your team, either on TN, E3, H1B, and various other visas in 10 business days. We are very focused on feedback at Meltzer Hellrung. With every case that we process for a client, both the employee and the company representative are asked to fill out an NPS survey. Give us a score, 1 to 10. How did we do? Or where can we improve? What did we do well? What did we not do well? And our NPS score in 2024, I think, was 91. I think to date in 2025, it's right around 88. Anything over 70 is considered to be best in class in the NPS arena. And we pride ourselves on not just processing cases and responding quickly and moving our casework, but really partnering with your organization as a client, as a vendor, excuse me. And that comes down to program management, having an assigned account team that you get to speak to regularly via email and on phone calls, regular touch points with that team to manage your immigration program, and various things like reporting, financial projections, and a couple other different things that we'll do for our clients as part of that program. You've heard me speaking here for the last few minutes, and with me today is my business and law partner, Matthew Meltzer. Matt, you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Matt. Good to be here. Matt Meltzer. I'm one of the partners here at Meltzer Hellrung. Work in all areas of business immigration, but often work with rapidly growing companies, entrepreneurs, and companies first accessing the U.S. market. Clearly, travel questions are really high on everyone's radar. I'm sure we have lots of company representatives and foreign national employees, so hopefully this is helpful. We can't answer all the uncertainty, but we're hoping that this gives some guidance and gives some tools to use to think about how to determine travel going forward.
And you've heard me speaking for the last few minutes. My name is Matthew Hellrung. I'm one of the other co-founder and managing partners here. I specialize in scaling immigration programs for our high growth clients and high volume clients. This is typically done with immigration policy creation, stakeholder training, and really standardization of processes on these accounts. And I'm excited to be talking about travel today as well. As Matt mentioned before, there are just a ton of things going on in travel at the moment. In addition to our services that we talked about earlier, the delivery vehicle for our legal services with clients is Voyager. We developed and released Voyager in 2022. We have all of our clients on it right now, including all their foreign national employees and families. And it's designed to be the delivery vehicle for our immigration services. Voyager it's proprietary to us. We use it as a management platform for both our team internally, our legal team, but also the employees and HRs and various general counsels that we deal with. It drives process efficiency. There is a tailored process for every type of visa that we will process for a client. Transparency, it collects all the information, that's in email, that's kind of in various box folders and everything else, and presents it both to the HR representative and also the employee, so they can see where their case is in process, who their case team is, what's the next step, when they can expect their case to be filed, and ultimately when they can expect their case to be approved. And we really focus on centralizing all information regarding immigration with the client into the platform. This includes preferences on how you like things filed, storage preferences of documents, communication preferences on how you'd like us to respond to foreign national questions. It's also questions from your internal teams at the HR in the HR suites. And a little bit more about transparency. We do this with dashboards. Both an employee, their family, and the HR user or general counsel can log into Voyager at any time and see all the active cases we're working on, all the steps that we've taken, what the next step is, and most importantly, what the company representative needs to do in order to push cases forward. We have extensive reporting abilities that we've added to the platform last year that can report on any piece of information that's collected in the platform is reportable. This is really important right now with our client base as things change really quickly. We can pull reports for every foreign national and their families in your program and identify the changes that may affect those individuals. And ultimately, we usually pull that to a phone call and discuss, case by case, what's the strategy? How do we triage this and come up with a solution for each employee that may be affected by these different policies? And then finally, we have a comprehensive knowledge center. Really important right now. We have leveled up our content production by bringing on a senior counsel, Michael Tarancic, who was working at AILA over the last 3 years, very connected into Washington and to the various government agencies that are quickly changing with new personnel. And we perpetuate that forward into blog posts, webinars that you're seeing today, as well as really well designed and thoughtful collateral that we put together on various types of visas, issues you will may come up against as an HR. Like, for example, someone doesn't have a social security number. What do I do in that situation? I need to onboard them as quickly as possible. We have collateral explaining all of this stuff, including I-9 processes. We really pride ourselves in right now and trying to provide really good, up-to-date, relevant information to you all as a community. We feel like that's our job as a provider in general. And also, one of the most important things we can be doing right now is kind of cutting through all of the hysteria that is the Trump administration and really focusing on what changes matter to your program and how are we going to address and solve those. I will throw it off to Matt Meltzer, our business partner here, and we're just going to run right into talking about travel. What does it mean for you all as company representatives? What does it mean for your employees and their families? And there's lots of stuff changing. So, Matt?
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. Without a doubt, over the past 4+ months, travel has been the number one issue that's come up. The pace of change in business immigration on substantive review of applications has not been really that big. Like if you ask me about what's new in reviewing H-1B applications, it's maybe slightly more scrutiny, but it's not any really huge changes. What's affected most people is uncertainty around travel. And let's be clear, like some of that uncertainty is intentional by the government. That we'll be honest that creating a culture that is a little bit more fearful is part of the game. Our goal is to try to create as much certainty for people and give as much clarity as possible. With that in mind, I just want to let everyone know that we did launch today a brand new tool on our website, which is a travel page that is updated in real time. So we know that travel is without a doubt the biggest issue. So if you come to our website and you go to the resources page, there is a dedicated page to travel that we will update whenever there are new issues. So it's really designed to be a place that you can get information, whether or not you're a client of Meltzer Hellrung. And we encourage people to check it when they're planning travel, or encourage people to recheck it before they actually take travel. Covers issues about, airports, visa processing, travel bans, whatever might be occurring. So it's a really great resource. We are really excited to launch that. So let's talk about travel. One of the biggest things that I think we've seen from the DOGE effort is to see more data, centralize information, cross-pollinate information across different places, and for the government to really seek more data overall about people. And we're seeing that really in enhanced vetting and screening of foreign nationals. We're expecting that it will take place more at USCIS. We're expecting that there is going to be more scrutiny and new forms coming out, but we haven't really seen how that's being done yet. We don't know what happens at CBP when people go through customs is a bit of a black box. We don't know what kind of resources CBP is relying on, but we clearly have seen more people getting flagged for secondary inspection. But it is very clear what's happening at Department of State for consular interviews. The DS-160, which is the tool for scheduling an interview at a consulate, has started asking for new and additional material. The most relevant one is that they're asking for information about social media handles. And they're asking for any social media handle person has used over the past 5 years. And some things that are happening where they're saying that you have to have your DS-160 in at least 48 hours before your interview because they would need to review those social media handles. What exactly that means in terms of review, what kind of triggers are happening, all we have at this point is anecdata. There's not enough for us to tell you like what the level of scrutiny is, what is triggering it. We're a little cautious. I think we can say that clearly the administration has is looking for things about communism, is looking for things about Palestinian rights, but we're not sure entirely like what is triggering additional review or might be problematic. We can just tell you going forward, as much as we are reluctant to tell people to limit their speech and are strong advocates for free speech, that people should be cautious who are foreign nationals about what they're putting on social media, because it will be subject to review from the government when applying for immigration benefits. The government has cut back on the number of visa waiver interviews, meaning that when you're going for a renewal of a visa, whether you need to show up in person to get an interview, as opposed to having whether or not you can get it done with a paper application only. So more people are needing to show up for interviews, and without a doubt, the DOGE effort is coming for Department of State as well, meaning that there are cuts in staff. So we're expecting longer wait times for the for appointments. This increased vetting, but didn't make it into the deck because it occurred just yesterday, but is really present in the news about student visas. So the Department of State released information just yesterday, and we'll be sending out an alert to our clients. It'll be on our website shortly, saying that anyone applying for an F, J, or M visa, whether you're on an active student, CPT, OPT, will be pausing interview screening until they develop new additional vetting. So people who already had a visa interview scheduled can still take that interview. People who might have wanted to travel and needed a new visa stamp to do so will not be able to schedule an interview at any consulate worldwide. We don't know how long that will last. So we don't really know what the scrutiny will look like. So we are recommending extreme caution for people in terms of international travel. If you need an F, J, or M visa, even if you have an active visa stamp, I would still deeply caution you about pursuing international travel, as we're not quite sure what the scrutiny at the airport might look like. Matt, you want to sort of take on what our sort of overall recommendations?
Yeah, so this is really baseline, but again, I think it's most important to talk about right now. Anytime someone's traveling, whether you're a foreign national and you're leaving the country, or perhaps you're in HR and have an employee that's leaving the country, always make sure that they travel with original immigration documents. This is going to be a passport with a valid, visa stamp foil. As Matt mentioned, obviously they're not giving those out to folks that would be more recently applying for F1 visas, but they still are available in other categories. We always recommend that folks carry their original approval notice with them. It's not required, but it does sometimes make a difference. And I think we're at the point now where we're just trying to eliminate the number of things that people can be hassled about when they're coming back through Customs and Border Patrol, and perhaps thrown into secondary inspection. Other things that are really important, just from a compliance standpoint, given the most recent registration requirement that the Trump administration implemented last month, always making sure that your employees are filling out the Form AR-11 if they move. This is really important. It's to be done within 10 days. Now, there wasn't a ton of scrutiny or oversight over this before, but again, given the recent registration process that the Trump administration has had a section of individuals in the United States complete, it's really important to make sure you keep that address updated with the USCIS. It could be considered a potential criminal violation, and if you travel abroad and re-enter and forget to do it, they could potentially deny you re-entry back into the United States. So again, really important to make sure you update your U.S. addresses as much as possible. If folks have prior criminal history, even minor incidents like DUIs, it may affect their ability to get into the United States, even for lawful permanent residents or green card holders. Would just ask, if you are a foreign national traveling, talk with your immigration counsel before you leave. Tell them that you're leaving. If you are in HR and you have an employee leaving, I would strongly recommend reaching out to immigration counsel just to make sure, did anything change? here are the documents that we're having people take to the consulate or travel abroad with. Do we need to amend this list? Are there additional documents you can provide us? This is pretty standard practice, but I think it's even more so important now, given the additional vetting that Matt talked about, as well as all the other things that are going on.
One other thing I would just add here, it sort of passed the peak craze, but the registration requirement, I would just remind people that most people who are entering the U.S. lawfully fulfill the registration requirement for the G325R. But if you do have children who are under 14 who enter, they are generally not considered registered. So just be aware that if you have children who stay past their 14th birthday, you should file a G325R for those children when they turn 14.
And I believe they have to do that within 30 days of the birthday. Is that right, Matt? Yeah.
Yep.
Now, what is secondary inspection? So we've all been, most folks that have traveled outside the country and re-enter, you go through Customs and Border Patrol or protection. They are there to, they're customs. They're there to scan your passport back in. And for most, if you're a U.S. citizen returning, usually not many questions. Oftentimes, if you're a legal permanent resident or entering in on a work visa, there will be more questions from the CBP officer. If for some reason, I think two cases when secondary inspection happens. Now, this is you get pulled into a small office after you go through customs. They will escort you there, and you are there for some reason. There's a multitude of things that could have happened. Perhaps the individual who's entering on an H-1B visa, for example, seemed a little nervous, or there is a flag in the person's profile. CBP keeps records on every single person that enters and exits the United States. They have the ability to reference those files immediately when you're presenting yourself for inspection back into the country. There could be a flag in there, something that a previous officer had flagged as suspicious or inconsistent. For any number of these reasons, individuals will get pulled into secondary inspection. Now, it's usually just additional questions, additional vetting. This could also include U.S. citizens. Importantly, you do not have a right to counsel in these circumstances. This has kind of been couched in the national security exception by the Supreme Court. Anybody coming back into the United States, including U.S. citizens, permanent residents, or folks entering on various types of visas, work visas, family visas, paroles, they do not have right to counsel in these circumstances, and CBP can keep you and detain you for quite a while in secondary inspection. As we see here, it could take 10 minutes if it's just a quick question. We've also had stories more recently of people spending several hours, 5, 6 hours, maybe 10 hours, where you're simply detained by Customs and Border Patrol to answer various questions, to run background checks. The officers can ask a lot of different types of questions in the circumstances. They can search your digital devices. I will say that again. They can search your digital devices. They can perform internet searches on you as an individual, your LinkedIn, as Matt mentioned before, your social media. And they rely on various other government databases that they have access to run background checks on you in these circumstances. A couple things that I would to take away from this is maybe 1% of people, probably less, are getting pulled into secondary inspection. These are the stories that come out from Customs and Border Patrol interactions. So they're disproportionately represented in terms of news coverage on them. They are serious. They should be taken seriously. And if somebody does get pulled into secondary inspection, I strongly recommend that the individual, if they make it through, talk to immigration counsel afterwards. Like, tell us what happened. What questions were you asked? What answers did you give? Did the CBP officer say anything to you? Did they say your profile is flagged? Do you know why? And unfortunately, as Matt mentioned before, it's a bit of a black box. So we are allowed to file FOIA requests for these files on individuals that CBP has, but the FOIA request can sometimes take a year or more, or 2 years, to actually get the information. And ultimately, by that time, it's not really useful. Secondarily, I would want to emphasize this again, or two more points I want to exercise in secondary inspection. One is they are allowed to search your devices. So we recommend, if you are carrying a digital device that has sensitive information, we give this to as advice to our own team. Delete the apps on your phone. Delete your Gmail app. Delete your Google Storage app. Delete anything that could be considered controversial or be used against you. Delete that app so that it's just not on your phone. Secondarily, if you want to take the next step, you can ship things, so you do not bring them with you through customs. We've had talking about shipping laptops back and forth, for example, if they have sensitive information, whether it's regarding immigrants or businesses or yourself or anything that you have. The biggest thing is, and I want to reemphasize this over and over and over again: do not sign anything that Customs and Border Patrol gives you. Never sign anything. There's some stories right now coming out where CBP is pressuring people into signing an admission of fraud, for example, and then using that admission to remove them without due process, just kick them out of the country right away and send them back on a plane. So most importantly, I would say, be sensitive with your electronic devices here. Secondarily, do not sign anything. Regardless of how long they detain you, do not sign anything. Eventually, they will have to let you go, or they will have to pursue due process and file things in a federal court. Signing that document beforehand, may forfeit your right to due process. And that's something we're most concerned about right now, is the expansion of expedited removal. Matt, any thoughts on inspection of devices here, or just secondary inspection at all?
Yeah, I would just add a couple of things. One is that you mentioned Google searches. I encourage people to be mindful of what they put online about things that might relate to their own job. It's if you're working as a consultant for a software company, and you are placed at an end client, I would be careful about on your own LinkedIn listing your end client as your true employer, because if you get pulled over at secondary inspection, they might be confused. CBP might be confused at why you're listing the end client, as opposed to the company listed on the I-797 on your petition as like your employer. And they might be confused at what that means, and say that maybe you're not being truthful because you're on your own LinkedIn, you're saying a different company is your employer. If you have had a title change that's significant, I would be careful about that. Like, I would try to make sure that your own public profile is as consistent with information in your underlying petition for immigration benefits as possible. In terms of this question of devices, I think this is also, this goes well beyond an immigration issue. This is an issue for companies as a whole, and whether it's sensitive IP, or if you are a company that deals with client information, whether you're in any kind of professional service, I think it is something that any company should be thinking about in terms of their policies about what employees can and cannot take with them on international travel. And I just also want to clarify that this inspection of devices does not apply to domestic travel, right? If you are taking a flight from New York to Los Angeles, this is not something you're going to worry about.
Matt, there's a good question here. Can USC does the USC have the right to remain silent in case there is no right to counsel in these circumstances? I would say yes. You always have the right to not self-incriminate. Whether that right is formally exercised in that circumstance or not, I just wouldn't answer their questions if they get to a point. There's a balance between cooperating to a point where you remove the issue and you can get through customs. But Matt, what do you think about that?
You have the right to not answer, but you may also, by not answering, be deemed to basically be admitting something. Like, I think it's a tricky ground. I think really the question is, like, why are you choosing not to answer something? I would probably not advise someone to not answer something wholly. I think if someone's like, what is your name? I wouldn't invoke some sort of right to not answer a question.
Yeah, I agree. It's a bit of a balance there.
Let's move on to travel bans. You want to take this one, Matt?
Yeah, so travel bans and restrictions, to be clear, there is not a formal travel ban in place right now, although there has been a list that's been circulated around for the last 60 days or so. I suspect that perhaps just releasing that list has endorsed or coerced certain countries to kind of cooperate more with the U.S. Security functions to avoid a ban. But there was a travel ban in the first Trump administration. It's still possible they may issue another one. It didn't. It's been circled around several times here, and I think we might have a slide for it. But the biggest country, most of the countries that were on the travel ban the first time around are included. A big change there was Pakistan, where Pakistan falls, and like whether it's red or yellow or green, we're not really sure right now. But that is a kind of a high volume immigration country when it comes to the U.S. I think the biggest thing to saying about travel bans right now is if you are a individual that is a citizen of one of those countries on the list, I would refrain from traveling unless it's an absolute emergency. You may get caught outside the country if a travel ban comes down and not be able to re-enter. And to be honest, there's no way that we can tell you when you'll be able to re-enter under those circumstances, even if you have a valid visa. Maintain awareness on the latest developments that are happening. Obviously, as we just published a travel awareness page for foreign nationals and HRs to use, check that often. We will constantly update that, usually within 24 or 48 hours of something happening that's major. Consult with your counsel if you have it. If you're traveling through countries with existing sanctions and travel bans. So this is, for example, folks traveling to Lebanon right now. There's been even a legal permanent resident that got detained, an H-1B resident that got detained as well, traveling through Lebanon. Not a country that's on the travel ban list, but given the relations the U.S. has with Lebanon and the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas, I would just avoid travel to that region in general. For fear that you may get stopped, you may get pulled into secondary inspection, even if you're not a citizen of one of those countries coming back into the United States. Lawful permanent residents. So lawful permanent residents, also known as green card holders, they always have the ability to travel with a valid permanent residency card and a copy of their original passport. So in this case, somebody is an Italian citizen. They've received a green card, perhaps through marriage in the United States, and they get that green card in hand. It looks a little bit like a license. We recommend, or you should, travel with both the passport and the green card. We have more recently seen some issues with legal permanent residents or green card holders re-entering the United States, issues with CBP and a expedited removal. Those are pretty fact-specific things. The one thing we have seen is if you have as you mentioned before, have a minor criminal infraction on your record, something to consider and consult with your attorney about whether you should travel or not. If you're traveling outside the United States for more than 6 months as a green card holder, you should file for a reentry permit. Otherwise, between 6 and 12 months, and certainly over 1 year, CBP can accuse you of abandoning your legal permanent residency status. So that's really important. So protect yourself from that. You want to file an I-131 reentry permit before you leave the United States to indicate that although you'll be gone for a while, you have no intention of abandoning your permanent residency status. And then, as I mentioned before, convicted of serious criminal offenses, we would advise to refrain from traveling in these circumstances because it's very, very much an unknown. What will a CBP officer take issue with? Probably not traffic tickets, but disorderly conduct. Now you're kind of getting up the scale. DUI, drug convictions, which was one of the issues an individual, I believe from Germany, was detained and expedited removed from in the Boston airport. Any type of serious, I would say, misdemeanor or above criminal conviction or charge for that matter. Doesn't have to be a conviction. I would be hesitant to advise any of those folks to travel outside the United States unless there's an absolute emergency. Folks have here, would traveling to Jordan be an issue? Jordan has historically maintained pretty positive relations with the United States. Off the top of my head, I cannot think of a terrorist organization that's operating inside Jordan right now. But given that they are in the Middle East and adjacent to Lebanon and Israel, I would be hesitant to advise somebody to travel there. My question would be, why do you need to travel? If it's and what country are you a citizen of? Where else have you traveled in the last 6 months, 12 months, 2 years? So it's tough to give a straight answer there, but I would be hesitant to advise travel unless it's required. Matt, you want to take the next slide here?
Sure. So let's talk about non-immigrants. Non-immigrants are people on a temporary visa. That's any kind of visa that's not a green card, whether it's a B visa, ESTA, J1, H1B, dependent visas, really any temporary entry into the US. There is nothing that your existing visas are still valid. So if you have a visa stamp in your passport, it's a valid document. And I also want to remind people that visas are category specific, not employer specific by and large. So if you have an H-1B visa and you've changed employer since you got the H-1B visa stamp, it's still valid to travel on that H-1B visa with an I-797 approval notice for the new employer. But we just encourage you to remember that, each time you travel, it is a unique experience. Your last experience does not guarantee the same experience. I would say that generally, if you were taken to secondary inspection in your last travel, you probably will be taken back to secondary inspection again. It's sort of hard to get out of that loop. If you have not been to secondary inspection, your likelihood is that you will not go to secondary inspection in your next travel, but just everyone should be aware that that can change at any given time. So just to be cautious overall is the name of the game. Couple of important things. Ensure that your visa is valid. It doesn't have to be valid for very long. It has to be valid on the day of entering. Your visa, the date of validity on a visa is about when you can use it to enter the US, not how long you can stay in the US. You should make sure you have a valid passport. It needs to have at least 6 months of validity on it to be used to enter the US. Keep in mind that if you have a passport that is valid shorter than your existing I-797 approval or other visa validity, you will only get the length of stay that is the length of your passport. So if you have an H-1B that's valid until September 30th of 2027, and your passport expires on June 1st, 2027, when you enter the US, you'll be given an I-94 that expires on June 1st, 2027. Getting a new passport will not make you eligible to extend your I-94. You will need to either leave the US or file an H-1B extension. So be very careful about when your passport expires. The other thing is just make sure that you check your I-94. CBP makes mistakes on the I-94s all the time. They are not malicious. They're just overwhelmed. Some of the officers are better than others. Like, this is not new. CBP historically, including up through the present, has been very easy to work with to correct errors. Like if they give you a wrong expiration date because they misread something, our experience is that CBP at almost every airport will make a correction. If they write down the wrong category, you entered on L1 and for some reason they said you entered on B1, they will correct it. It's pretty easy to contact CBP to correct I-94 errors, but the first and most important thing is vigilance. Check your I-94. Every time you enter the US, go to the I-94 website on CBP, pull your I-94, check it. And then we encourage people to make sure they have valid documents while they're traveling, as Matt sort of talked about before. If you're on an I-797 based visa, make sure you have your I-797. We encourage people to carry a current employment verification letter confirming that they are still employed in the capacity that they were sponsored for. And if you are on OPT or F1, make sure you have a valid and recently issued I-20.
Yeah, Matt, I get a lot of questions from folks about carrying like a copy of the petition, the H-1B petition or TN or whatever it was issued. What do you think about that?
I wouldn't.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think it's worth it. I think that I've never heard at CBP of that. Like, if you're going for a visa processing, I think it's important to have a copy for your visa interview, but I don't think it's important for travel.
I agree. I see that there's a question about my example about the I-94. So just to repeat, my case was if someone has an I-797 that's valid until September 2027, their passport is valid until
June of 2027. They'll be given I-94 until June of 2027. If that person does exit and re-enter with a new passport, they'll get a new I-94 that's valid through the I-797 date of September of 2027. There's also a question here, Matt, about what should be included in an employment verification letter. An employment verification letter is just a letter from the company saying that you are in fact employed by the company in a role. It just generally says that the name of the person is employed with company X in the role of Y. It may include job duties. It does not have to. There's no reason for it to say much more than that. Matt, is there anything
I agree.
in an employment verification letter?
I would probably not include job duties. Again, I think providing the right type of information, but not all of the information. I'm a huge proponent of that, especially when it comes to answering questions. Answer the question that is asked. Do not provide additional information. So I agree with everything that Matt said. I would probably exclude job duties just because I don't think it's relevant to the CBP officer's inquiry. They're most concerned with, are you still employed by the company that's on your visa stamp? And I don't think that job duties really provide more support for that. International travel if a new visa is required to re-enter the United States. So right now, as Matt mentioned before, folks that are traveling internationally that need to secure a new F1 visa, J1, or M visa will not be able to schedule visa stamping appointments and thus will not be able to re-enter the United States. So it's important that if you have folks that had planned on traveling over the summer that do have visa passport stamps that are expired, and to be clear, you can be in the United States and have a visa passport stamp that is expired. It is that I-94 record that controls your status and how long you can stay. And it's very common for folks to be in the United States with a valid passport, let's say with an H-1B visa that expired last year because they simply just had not left the United States. And they don't need to get a new visa passport stamp. Their I-94, which they receive from CBP and subsequently is extended by an H-1B extension filing with the USCIS, suffices for status the entire time the person is here. But if you do need to travel outside the United States and secure a new visa passport stamp, there's a couple things that we want to recommend as best practices here. And again, we're not advising this for anybody that's an F1, M, or J. One, fill out a DS-160, which is required for every visa, every U.S. consular visit for a visa stamp. Fill that out well in advance. And expect that interviews are going to take a long time to schedule and there's going to be long wait times. I always recommend, if you can, schedule an interview that's early in the morning because as the day goes on, people run over and eventually you end up waiting there for a long time. So get in there Monday morning, like 9 a.m. if you can, when you schedule that stuff. Sorry, Matt, can you back to the previous slide real quick? Yeah. Bring detailed documentation with you to prove your eligibility and when you're going for an application. At Meltzer Hellrung, we will provide some of this documentation to the employee directly if they're going for a visa stamping appointment. We also have a consular processing service that will put this together for foreign nationals and also ask hypothetical questions that you may incur in the visa stamping appointment itself. As always, if you have counsel, contact counsel to determine the current visa appointment processing timelines. There's a large, it's becoming probably a little more strict. You don't always have to go back to the country you're a citizen of to get a visa passport stamp. Oftentimes, if folks are in the United States and perhaps Indian nationals, we'll advise them to go to Canada to renew their H-1B visa stamp, or Mexico, or someplace in the Caribbean. Those are still eligible spots to do a new visa stamp processing, although we think it's probably becoming more and more difficult to get those appointments scheduled. And just generally, we're seeing the appointment times, like when you can actually get an appointment from the time you've submitted your DS-160 to lengthen. In some places, it can be a few days, some places a few weeks, other places a few months. Primarily in China and India, you're seeing longer wait times to get into the consulates. And also, you can try to go to different consulates within a particular country. So we often have people go to the U.S. Embassy in Toronto. You can also go to the one in Vancouver if you're going to Canada. There are different wait times and different processing periods at different consulates depending on the supply of individuals they have adjudicating visa stamping applications and also the demand of individuals attending those consulates. So we always encourage to take a look at a few consulates within a particular country if you're going for visa stamping and try to schedule with the one that has the shortest wait time. Challenges with visa stamping appointments. So one thing, and Matt mentioned before, is there's just a reduction in staff at the Department of State to process these visa stamping appointments, and thus there are longer wait times, less appointments available. The Department of State is transitioning appointment systems, which can also often create delays and confusion. Government is not great at implementing new systems, unfortunately, and that does cause a lot of issues. As Matt mentioned before, the DS-160 is the form you need to complete before you go to your visa stamping appointment, and that now requires disclosure of social media handles. You have to fill that out within at least 48 hours of your visa stamping interview so they can do background checks on you. We haven't seen this a ton right now, but they could change the adjudicatory standards at consulates. We saw this in the first Trump administration where they just issued more visa stamping denials. For example, we put somebody through the H-1B lottery, they get their H-1B lottery approval, they want to travel, let's say, back to India to get an H-1B visa stamp and visit their family and come back to the United States in early October to start work in H-1B status. They go to the consulate, they fill out the DS-160 beforehand, and ultimately they're denied at the consulate for a visa stamp. We haven't seen that happen a lot, but we expect those denial rates to start creeping up here as the various appointees from the Trump administration dig deeper and deeper into these agencies. So a couple best practices: schedule your visa stamping appointment really far in advance. Matt, I think you could probably schedule 3 or 4 months out right now, perhaps longer at some consulates. So if you can, do that. Fill out your DS-160 now. Schedule your appointment for September if you want to do visa stamping shortly before you change status to H-1B from F1. Make sure that what you put in your DS-160 is consistent with what was put in the H-1B visa application or the TN application or anything else that you're applying for. The government is getting, as Matt has mentioned, sharing information between agencies more and more now, and they get very concerned when there's small differences in information between, let's say, your DS-160 and what was entered on your H-1B the lottery petition that was filed with the USCIS. Have the DS-160 application reviewed by counsel. Again, we offer a consular processing service where we will have the individual complete the DS-160, review it for consistency purposes, provide an application packet, and then put the person through a practice interview simulating a consular officer so that the individual is prepared for the actual interaction itself. And then when you're traveling to do visa stamping abroad, plan on staying in the country for maybe a week or 2. I always recommend schedule the visa stamping appointment on the first or second day that you're in country, because sometimes even if you're approved, it can take several days for them to give you your passport back with a new visa stamp in it. Worst case scenario, if you're denied or you're issued what's known as a 221G, which is a challenge for further information that's issued by the Department of State at the consular interview, we'll have time to respond to that so that you're still within your travel period in that foreign country. Matt, anything that I think I missed there that you recommend?
Ellen asked a question about the visa wait times. It's gone from giving very precise information about the number of days to sort of monthly information, and it's much less specific and makes it harder to use. And if there's any insight into why that is, I think that the question is sort of answers itself in the sense that the government is not trying to be helpful. They're trying to make it a less transparent and easy to use process, unfortunately.
There's something quick here. It says we have a colleague has a foreign sister company who got a B1, B2 to attend conferences in the United States. The spouse also got a B1, B2 at the same time. Now they're having a child, and the spouse wants to change the wife wants to change the name to match the husband's name. In that case, she needs to get a new passport with an updated name. What would happen to the current B1, B2? That visa stamp is still valid, even though it's in the old passport. The question is, will the country that's changing the passport allow the individual to retain the old passport for that purpose? You can travel through CBP with an old passport that still has a valid visa stamp in it and a new passport. at the same time. So Matt mentioned that scenario a little earlier. So that is possible. Just depends on whether the country that you're receiving that new passport from will allow you to retain it and the visa stamp therein. A lot of times they won't. They'll take the old passport. I know there was a couple questions about the visa waiver program, B1, B2 visitors here. So the visa waiver program applies to about 40 countries. It's also known as ESTA. Now it's been changed to ESTA. That's the system that you apply through. The visa waiver program corresponds to a group of countries that have agreed to share significant amounts of security data amongst themselves about citizens. This makes these countries feel less concerned about having like perhaps a US, like an American entering the UK or a French person entering Germany, for example. Because of this security sharing, they now have this visa waiver program or group, as also known as ESTA right now. Foreign nationals admitted pursuant to the visa waiver program or ESTA may travel to the United States for up to 90 days for either tourism or business. They do not need visa passport stamps to enter. Visa waiver entrants are generally precluded from extending their stay after that 90-day period. If you want to stay longer, you have to exit and re-enter. The one thing I will note with folks traveling under ESTA or visa waiver is that the more you enter and the longer you stay and the shorter your exits, the more likely you are to get stopped and asked what you're doing in the United States. So it's okay to come to the United States, for work travel, tourism, all of that. But if you're entering the United States 3, 4, 5 times a year in ESTA, staying for 60 or 90 days and then exiting for maybe a week or two and then coming back again, sooner or later, Customs and Border Patrol will ask what you're doing in the United States and perhaps even accuse you of working. So it's really important to be cognizant of the cadence in which you come to the United States, stay, and then the amount of time that you exit before your next reentry into the U.S. One small difference between B1, B2 visitors and visa waiver program. Again, visa waiver program entrants can stay up to 90 days. People that have a B1 or B2 passport stamp are allowed to stay up to 180 days in the United States. That's the primary difference. Usually folks that are eligible for the visa waiver program don't need a B1, B2 visitor visa. For folks that are not eligible for the visa waiver program, they must get a B1, B2 to come to the United States to visit for tourism or business purposes.
I just want to be cognizant of time here since we have more content to get through here and coming up on the hour. I know we'll be sharing this, and as I said, a lot of this information is on our travel advisory on our website. So I'm going to skip over the caveat because I want to make sure we get to the questions about policy, which are not on our website. So just in the sake of time here, I want to talk about get to the policy question and talk about corporations and having a travel policy and whether or not you should even have one. There is no right answer to this question, Matt. Like I think it really depends on your company. What do you do? How often do people travel? If you're a company that has people travel internationally once a year at most, is it, it's only a couple of people, is it worth having a policy? Probably not. If you are an international consultancy or a large law firm and people are traveling for international business all the time, or you're a foundation and you have people traveling on grants or things, like, is it worth having a travel policy? Probably. So I think the question is first, how often do people travel? And do who's going to be impacted? Second question is, who's in your workforce? Do you have one foreign national? Do you have 20% of your company as foreign nationals? That's going to change whether or not you think about how you think about policy as well. Something that affects one person versus hundreds of people is going to change how you think about a policy issue. Matt, what are you thinking about in terms of like other factors that companies should determine, like, do you even need a policy?
Yeah, I think you hit on two of the ones. Primarily is, do you have a lot of foreign nationals that are traveling outside the United States at all times? Do you have just anybody that's traveling outside the United States or traveling internationally a lot? Probably good to have a policy if you have people that are doing it often. Again, how many people are actually doing that? Again, not just how many times is one person traveling, but how many people are actually traveling every year internationally. There's always another consideration that I've seen when we've drafted these policies that I think is important to mention, and that's is the person traveling for tourism or their own personal benefit, or are they being asked to travel because of the business is asking them to travel? And we've always, in a lot of the policies that we've drafted, really kind of like logic tree to split there, depending on, let's say, and I'm thinking somebody travels internationally to get a new visa stamp at some point, right? And they get stuck abroad at a consulate. Was that travel required by the business such that, you might want to help the person out with like a virtual VPN, continue to pay them abroad, all of that stuff? Or were they just traveling because they wanted to, lay on a beach someplace in Vietnam and they get stuck there for whatever reason? I've seen a lot of companies make different policies about each one of those situations and what the company will and won't do as a result of the purpose for the travel itself.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think?
One
I
thing I
mean,
would just, the other thing I would just talk about with travel is, you know, what it is, when does the company require travel? What is it need for someone to opt out to travel? Is it enough for someone to say, I don't want to? Is it enough for someone to say, I have a fear of it? Is it enough for someone to say, I need a visa stamp to do this? I think there's a whole bunch of questions, but I think the one thing that companies should think about in terms of travel is if there is business travel that is generally desired, when is it actually mandatory and what is the process for allowing employees to opt out of that? A couple of things that we think are best practices if you have people who are traveling to the US and need a visa, we recommend that you do work with counsel for that. We also think that if you are having people travel to third countries, non-US countries, we think it's helpful to have counsel available to work with visas as well. I think the reality is there's a lot of countries that getting a visa is not super complicated. I don't think you need a lawyer for everything, but it's certainly worth having a lawyer available to be a resource to determine whether they are even needed. We're not afraid to tell you that it's something that you don't need a lawyer for. There are plenty of countries that have very simple visa processes.
I would also just add about, here's
Go ahead.
here's the slide. No, I was gonna say, I think, we're talking about international travel, but I also think it's important to touch on domestic travel, and here's the slide. There are considered, especially with foreign nationals, even though they may be in valid status, or perhaps you have folks that are working under various paroles that are likely to be canceled or have already been canceled but are still valid for the short term, or there's a court case tied up in federal courts deciding whether the parole permission is valid and how long. TPS is subject to this, the U4U program, some of the humanitarian paroles. I would be just be mindful of you asking employees to travel domestically. Now every state has various levels of cooperation with CBP and ICE and immigration authorities in general. Also, this can differ by like city in the same state. There are cities that do cooperate with ICE or CBP and some that don't. There are entire states that do and don't. But I do think you have to take as valid somebody's concern if you have them travel to, let's say, Texas or Florida, and they are in some type of quasi immigration status, or perhaps they have an H-1B or something else, and they're just very concerned about it. I would advise in those situations, is the travel really necessary? Must they be on site? Is it something that can be accomplished via a Zoom call? And kind of like go down the tree. Matt, what do you think about those situations?
Yeah, I think you just also have to be aware that many people have fears that are not unreasonable. People who are lawfully present in the country, that if you have employees who are on DACA or other things where they might be currently lawfully present, they may have fears about going to other areas of the country, especially depending on what the color of their skin is or how they speak, and a fear of interacting with local police officers. I think you should also just be aware that people have families. Someone might be a U.S. citizen, and they might be married to someone who's undocumented. That person also might have fears about interacting with police and having to disclose something about their spouse they don't want to disclose. So there's a whole range of reasons that people might have fears of travel to other locations, and I think you should just be cognizant of that. You may not want to ask, or you may want to ask what the reason is. That's really up to you as a company, but just be aware that there's a lot of factors that go into people's fears, and they're not all unreasonable. The only
We're
constant,
just out on.
yeah, the only
Go ahead,
constant
Matt.
is change. So let's talk about quick, Matt, I think we have 2 minutes here.
Yeah.
Change in how we talk about recruiting and international transfer policies, thinking about what companies are doing in terms of they're actually, when they're bringing on new talent, bringing people to the US. I think that one thing to be just cognizant of is there is no single answer here. If you are a company that brings in international talent, whether it's you have a multinational organization and you are transferring people to the US or globally, if you are bringing in people for training programs, if you have people coming to the US for conferences or retreats or development programs, like you should talk to a lawyer. I think it's a question whether you should have a policy and then thinking through what that policy might be. Sometimes the answer just might be is you don't need a thing. You just have a couple people you want to think about. I think that's fine too. Like I will not emphasize people have a policy when it's not needed. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think under most work visa classifications and immigrant visas, which are green cards, I think be aware of who's traveling and when. Some areas where we just always have seen difficulties, which I expect that to increase, like people that are applying for ESTA and visitor visas, I would just expect, and we're seeing a little bit of this now, just the denial rates to spike. The country the individual is coming from is actually, very significant in my mind in applying for B1, B2 visas. What are their the assets and relationships, jobs they have abroad that require them to exit the U.S. if they are granted a B1 or B2 visa. We've also seen denials skew based off of age and gender, country of origin, the citizenship. I think those are all factors, especially in the B1, B2 ESTA range. For H-1Bs, TNs, a lot of the other visa types, we expect to see maybe a slight increase in denials at the consulates, but we haven't seen that exactly right now. Just a little bit more hassling by CBP when people come through. And I think it's just important to listen to your employees here, listen to their concerns. Even if they can't be addressed directly, there's just a lot of anxiety around international travel. And I think it's important just to listen to your employees and try to craft the policy eventually if you have enough of these complaints or these concerns to address it. Your company should have an electronic device policy when they're traveling. Again, this is how sensitive is the data that individuals are traveling with? Do they use their personal cell phones? Do they have company laptops? Should they use a VPN when they're logging in from abroad? I think these are all questions to consider, especially if people get stuck abroad, whether it's via a visa stamp denial or something else that happens or a travel ban. What will you do in those situations? And it may not be the point at which you have to write a policy down right now. It could be more of just a thought discussion to generate, what are the possibilities that we could do, and then eventually, if something happens, start drafting a more formal policy. I know, so we tried to get through as much as we could today. I know there's a lot on travel right now. We always encourage folks. One, if you have specific questions or you're concerned about your employees or your programs, feel free to reach out to Matt or myself. You can always navigate to our website and fill out a contact us form, which will reach out to you usually within about 24 hours to schedule a consultation call. And as Matt mentioned, and we both mentioned several times, that new travel guidance for foreign nationals is up on the website right now. So we encourage you all to use it, reference it. We'll be pushing it as much as possible because we understand that everybody's very stressed with international travel at the moment. We appreciate your time today. And just as a reminder, we'll be sending out a copy of the presentation as well as the deck we're using. And hope everybody has a good week.
Thank you.